Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We've got some friends that have already joined us. We've got others that are streaming their way into our webinar. We are so excited, delighted, and honored to have all of you with us. And we want to welcome you to this exciting conversation with two remarkable authors. My name is Vineet Chander, and I direct Princeton University's Hindu Life program, which is a part of our Office of Religious Life. Along with the Hindu Life program, tonight's program is co-sponsored by the Kotzen Children's Library at Princeton University and by the Princeton Public Library. We're also delighted to work with two local businesses, known to many of the folks on this webinar, I'm sure, Labyrinth Books and Jazams. Labyrinth and Jazams are working closely with us and are so proud to be handling book sales as part of this evening's event. Both have generously offered a 10% discount on purchases made by today's attendees. So please check them out at labyrinthbooks.com and jazams.com for more information. And for those who are local, please feel free to stop on in and support our friends at Labyrinth and Jazams. I'd like to now call on Shrija Pacha, one of our Princeton University students, and an admitted Arusha and Kiranmala fan, to introduce our two special guests this evening. Shrija?
Thank you, Vineet, and thank you all for being here. I'm so happy to introduce our two special guest speakers, acclaimed authors Roshani Chokshi and Sayantani DasGupta. Roshani Chokshi is the author of commercially and critically acclaimed books for middle grade and young adult readers that draws on world mythology and folklore. Her work has been nominated for the Locus and Nebula Awards and has frequently appeared on the Best of the Year lists from Barnes & Noble, Forbes, BuzzFeed, and more. Her New York Times bestselling series include The Star-Touched Queen duology, The Gilded Wolves, and Arusha and the End of Time, which was recently optioned for film by Paramount Pictures. Sayantani DasGupta is the New York Times bestselling author of the critically acclaimed Bengali folktale and string theory-inspired Kiranmala and the Kingdom Beyond books, the first of which, The Serpent's Secret, was a Bank Street Best Book of the Year, a Booklist Best Middle Grade Novel of the 21st Century, and an E.B. White Read Aloud Honor Book. She's also a member of We Need Diverse Books. Sayantani is a pediatrician by training, but now teaches at Columbia University. And before continuing, I just wanted to say that I myself am a huge fan of both of your works. They've guided me in my own writing and inspired me in more ways than I can count. So on a personal note, I have a lot of love and admiration for you both, and I'd just like to thank you again for being with us tonight. So this evening, Roshani and Sayantani will be interviewed by Dr. Dana Sheridan, Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Kotzen Children's Library, and me, and Vineet Chander, Coordinator for Hindu Life and Hindu Chaplain on campus. Dr. Dana, would you please start us off?
Sure. I would like to say hello to all the readers and fans joining us today. There will be a Q&A for you at the end of tonight's event. Though you will not be able to ask these questions live, you can submit questions through the Q&A button that's down on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we'd also like to give the priority of the questions to our younger readers. So if you could please give your first name and your age when submitting your question, that will allow us to get them ready for your favorite authors to answer. And just a reminder that this event is being live streamed and recorded as well. So let's go.
Awesome. Well, I can start us off. And I'd like to begin by asking you both about the stories behind your stories, so to speak. You both include lovely forward and epilogue notes in which you acknowledge the roots of your stories. Roshani, you write so movingly that while you don't intend the Arusha books to, and here I quote from you, to serve as an introduction to Hinduism, which is beautifully nuanced and varies from region to region, you do offer it as, again, to quote your beautiful words, a window peering out into a brighter ocean of tales and traditions. And in a similar spirit, Sayantani, you write about your grandmother's and aunt's retelling of traditional Bengali stories, helping you to discover a part of yourself when you were visiting with them in Kolkata. And you write of your hope that the Kiranmala stories could honor the magic of those traditional stories. So I'd like to ask, why was it important for both of you to include notes of these sorts? And what would you like your readers, and especially your non-South Asian and non-Hindu readers, perhaps in some cases, readers for whom your books will be their first introduction to these cultures, what would you like them to know about these cultures and traditions? Perhaps Sayantani, you could begin us off.
Sure. So first, before I begin, let me just thank both of you for having us, and all of the folks behind the scenes, all the wonderful co-sponsors who've allowed this to happen. And in particular, I didn't have a chance in the time to thank Srija. That was such a lovely and moving and personal introduction. So thank you, Srija, for that. That I was really touched, and I could see Roshani was as well. So thank you, thank you. So Vineet, in answer to your question, I think I would just say it's really hard to be what you can't see. And when I was young, I'm an Indian immigrant daughter. And when I was young in the 70s and 80s, I was growing up in the Midwest of the US. There was very, very few South Asians, Desis, but even people of color represented, of any sort, represented in the books I loved so much. I was a devourer of books, the movies I watched, the television shows I watched. Already I was watching a lot of space movies and space television shows, admittedly, which is why there's so much space in my books. But there was no one who looked like me. And I think that kind of narrative erasure, it can be a kind of psychic violence, right? You end up feeling in your heart like, gee, maybe if no one like me is a hero, maybe no one like me can be a hero. And so it was only really when I went back to Kolkata and to Shantiniketan, where my family lived and lives in India. And I heard these traditional Bengali folk tales, which interestingly are shared by Bengalis of multiple faith traditions. So these are our folk tales, like our Goldilocks type stories or Jack and the Beanstalk stories that are shared by Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, what have you. And people in Bangladesh, people in India, and people throughout the diaspora. But I would hear these stories, and they were stories about brown kids like me, princes and princesses having adventures, saving the world. And it was only then that I really could see myself as a hero, potentially as somebody who could do great and important things, or even meaningful things. And those stories meant so much to me that when years later, I found my own children having the exact same experience as I had had. They were reading fantasy and they were saying to me, my son is 18. So let's say 10 years ago when he's 8, he's reading Harry Potter, Artemis Fowl, Percy Jackson. He's loving these stories, but there isn't a brown kid in that cadre at that point about 10 years ago. And that's when I went back to my grandmother's folktales and I began to write The Serpent's Secret, really for my son and my daughter. The reason I wrote the note at the beginning or at the end, the author's note, was because I knew that many people might not be familiar with these folktales that I was drawing upon. Not to be didactic or, to kind of be a tour guide, as it were, but really just to give a note of context for those people for whom these stories were unfamiliar. But I hope that even if you don't read the author's note, the stories should serve the purpose of kind of being an adventure that anyone can enter into regardless. So that's my intention, is to write a rip-roaring good story. If you know the Bengali folktales, you might know some extra nuance. But if you don't, you can still enjoy the humor and the action and the friendship and the demon snot. Come for the demon snot, stay for the politics, I always say. So that's my answer. Roshani, what say you?
So really, when I was writing that note, I think I was reacting, frankly, to I think this sort of defensiveness that I have and that I know that a lot of other South Asian artists share. So, when I was growing up, same thing as Sayantani, like I did not see myself represented in mainstream media at all. And so when I started writing these stories, they were very much self-insert. They came from love. They came from the stories my grandmother told me. They came from my love of the Amar Chitrakatha comic books that I just devoured and spilled so much food on in my existence. But one thing that I've really felt is that when it comes to our stories, one thing we are constantly reminding our audiences is that people of color are not a monolith. We come to these stories through our own lived experiences, through plenty of nuance. And I think sometimes when people read our books, either they can really see themselves represented and they're really excited, or they can feel excluded. Like, hey, somebody told me this story this way, or I was always told it was like this, or you got it wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't bother me as much anymore, because I really think that response comes from years of being erased. So I understand that feeling of being starved to see yourself, that you hope that this story that has gotten mainstream acclaim, that's been a New York Times bestseller, has won awards, surely that will be able to hold your identity too. And the truth is that we are only one person and we only have our own memories and our own lived experiences in which we can pull from to write. So I wrote that hopefully as a reminder to audiences that it is a work of fiction, that I am very acutely aware that when I play with Hindu mythology, I am stepping on the sacred, but I hope that it doesn't look like I'm stomping on it, but almost trying to engage it in a new dance. And I hope that resonates with readers. And I'm very fortunate that so far it has. As for what I hope readers from other traditions take from it, I really hope that they see that there's so much more that unites us than separates us. Throughout every sort of ancient folktale, ancient story, you can find thousands of echoes to other things. If you're familiar with Romeo and Juliet, oh my gosh, you've got to read Layla and Majnun. If you love Beauty and the Beast, or you love the Cupid and Psyche tales, or East of the Sun, West of the Moon, these stories of quests and of losing the person that you love, I found a lot of cinematic echoes in that when I was reading stories of Shiva and Parvati, which I always thought was one of the most romantic stories of how this god and goddess found one another in another lifetime. So yeah, I hope that it's exactly what I say. I hope that it's a window into something brighter. And I hope that it inspires people to do their own research, come to their own conclusions, and hopefully find some inspiration along the way.
Beautiful. Thank you both.
Both of your novels involve female heroines, and in some instances, the characters express complete incredulity that girls can fill these traditionally male hero roles. How did your heroines come to be? So Roshani, we'll start with you.
Well, in the Aru Shah series, I was really just trying to exercise a lot of my middle school demons. And so I gave Aru pretty much most of myself. As a seventh grader, I was a liar. I had a huge imagination. I wasn't that great at school. I actually flunked English. So it was a trying time for my family. But what I really loved was Aru's sassiness. She's the kind of kid that just, I don't know, like when I was that age, I was just waiting every single day to be stopped with his Rolls Royce pulling up in front of my school and just being like, oh my God, it's you, the long lost princess of so-and-so. And I'd be like, what, me? Oh God. All right, let me get my stuff. Let's go. But that didn't happen. And so as the years go on, you just have to find something magical about yourself. So that's what I put into Aru. But for my very first book, The Star-Touched Queen, which is like a Hades and Persephone reimagining. It has elements of the folktale of Savitri and Satyavan, which I really loved. I gotta be honest, that came from utter and complete wish fulfillment. Before then, I was trying to sell my fan fiction. And I remember in high school, we read the poem Paradise Lost. And if you're familiar with it, it's about, just paradise being lost. No, I'm kidding. It's about Lucifer's fall from grace and from heaven. And there's this epic line that Lucifer says as he's kicked out and his wings are smoldering. And I don't know, in my head, he looked like Tom Hiddleston. And he looks up at the skies and he says, I would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. And at 15 years old and, mostly like a dumpster fire of a teenager, I was like, man, I bet it's really hot. So that was my takeaway from that poem. And I wanted to take that line and I wanted to give it to a girl that had those Hades and Persephone vibes. What would it be like to put that line of power into the mouth of a girl who wants power? And what would it be like to weave that story with so many of the cultural elements that I loved and that I grew up with? So that's where they came from.
I love that. I absolutely love that story. I'm still assimilating the English failing thing.
It's really bad. My parents didn't find out for a long time because I was so good at forging my mom's signature, and then I got caught. So
yeah, I feel you.
But clearly they were missing something there, because you seem to know your stuff vis-a-vis writing, right? So clearly the teacher might have been missing something there. But so in answer to your question, Dana, I drew the Kiranmala character that I write through, my character in a kurta and combat boots, and my daughter's at the time favorite combat boots. I draw her from an original Bengali folktale. And the Kiranmala in that original Bengali folktale, that story is called Orun Borun Kiranmala. So it's Orun and Borun, her brothers, and Kiranmala. And that's the original tale. In the original tale, the two brothers are really sexist and terrible to her. And they say to her, "You're the youngest, you're the girl, you don't get to come on adventures." And of course, each in turn goes off on an adventure and gets in a heap of trouble. And in the end, who rescues them both? Kiranmala. And I always really gravitated to this tale for obvious reasons. It was about an underestimated girl, and I felt like an underestimated girl character in my own life. But it was about an underestimated girl character who actually saves the day, right? With these hidden qualities, who saves the day. And so I drew her directly from that original folktale, but I got rid of the two brothers who I didn't like very much. And I was like, "You're out of here." So my Kiranmala is an only child, which I am. Her birthday is Halloween. My birthday is the day before Halloween. She doesn't want to dress like an Indian princess every single Halloween because it's also her birthday. I didn't want to dress like an Indian princess every single Halloween because it was also my birthday. These are the parallels. But my Kiranmala, unlike me, discovers that she really is an Indian princess. And so what happens? And she discovers that the stories that her parents were telling her were really true. And that's kind of the through line for me. It's this idea that my grandmother's Bengali folktales were a through line, were a map for me, right? Drawing my way home, helping me figure out who I was and to whom I was connected and to where I was connected. And similarly, Kiranmala follows these stories and discovers her power across the galaxies. And she gets to be this kind of terrific girl action heroine, not without, having her own insecurities, not without needing friends, which I think is a much more realistic way to be a heroine, right? Is to actually work collaboratively, is to be afraid but still go forward anyway. And that's how Kiranmala was born.
I love that. I love that you took something and then just were like, actually, I like it better this way. Because I totally forgot to add, did do that in the Darkshot series. It's based off of the legendary demigod Bandhava brothers from the Mahabharata. But I just thought, like, what if they were girls? Like, then what would happen? And that was really fun for me, and then offensive to other people, but mostly fun for me. So that's really all that matters.
No, I mean, I was scared at that. I'm sure you all have other questions, but just to respond to you, I was frightened, and I'm sure you were too. You were just speaking about this in terms of your author's note. Mm-hmm. I was frightened at first to play with these stories. And the way that I gave myself permission, and maybe this is just me talking myself into it, was that, when my grandmother would tell us these folk tales, they were oral stories. And like any oral tradition, they changed. Yeah. So for instance, like if some cousin was naughty that day and like, let's say, lied about X, then suddenly, mysteriously, the character in the folktale that evening would like lie about something, but discover a way to confess the truth or whatever, right? So my grandmother would like tweak these tales, and that's the way I gave myself permission. I just said, well, I'm doing the same thing that generations of storytellers have done, which is accept that culture is dynamic, accept that stories need to be adapted for new sets of listeners. And that's how I made myself feel like, okay, I have permission to tell this story in a new way. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Oh, completely. To treat these ancient stories as living things. Because I think when we talk about mythology, people assume that we mean that it's outdated or dead. And I don't think so at all. I think that mythology, in the way that I use it, at least, is just a sense of a repetition of a cultural tradition. That's what it is. It's a celebration of that. So yeah, what you said is completely resonates. I love that you did that. That's brilliant.
Well, one thing that's becoming clear, I think, to all of us eagerly listening along is that you two have a sense of humor. There is between, what was it, like demon vomit and
snot.
Demon snot. I'm sorry, demon snot. Right.
Be specific.
between the demon snot and then Roshani using this as a like a kind of catharsis for like what a screw up she was in high school. This is ending up being more of a comedy than perhaps we had intended. But I do want to ask you about humor, because I think, as it's obvious to anyone who comes into contact with your works, there's a playfulness, there's a quirkiness, and there's, in the best sense of the word, an irreverence. In Game of Stars, for instance, we're introduced to a demon queen who trades in embroidered silk saris for cheesy 80s workout gear. And a character goes on a terrifying intergalactic rickshaw ride, but somehow makes it a priority to take selfies and post them on her social media, right? In Aru Shah and the Song of Death, Justin Bieber's Despacito ends up becoming like the secret weapon. The glossary in the Arusha books alone includes some of the most hilarious and roasty definitions of Hindu deities that I've ever come across. Can you each describe your approaches to humor in your books? And Roshani, maybe we can start off with that glossary.
Oh, yeah. I mean, frankly, when you're a writer, it sounds like, I don't know, when I thought I was going to be a writer professionally, I thought that meant that I would somehow inherit a decrepit mansion, a beautiful, elegant, yet somewhat nefarious cat, and I would just write all day in silk robes. And the truth of it is, no, my cat shredded my silk robe. I'm just talking alone to the cat and like, just trying to listen in sometimes what my neighbor is doing, because his arguments are really interesting. So I'm like, what is he doing? Anyway, so when I write, I have to make myself laugh. And then I'm constantly trolling my husband, who I do adore, but I practice all those stories on him. When he's like, wait, what's this story about? I'm like, all right, sit down. Let me tell you a thing. And he's like, okay. And if he starts slouching, then I'm like, I've lost him. I've got to find some way to bring him back. And so that's sort of, I don't know, like I imagine like how I wanted some of these stories to be told to me, with a levity, and also sometimes poking fun at their own contradictions. Like when you come across a tale about a demon king who can't be slayed by, all these conditions. He can't be killed morning or nighttime or outside or inside or by, a human or by a beast, and everyone's like, oh my God, whatever will we do? And you're just like, well, you could have sent in a woman instead. You have this. You have the Tales of Narasimha, which was one of my favorite. It's an avatar of Vishnu. He appears with the head of a lion, the body of a man. He comes and rips up this demon king in a courtyard, because that's neither inside or outside. And he comes to him at twilight, because that's neither daytime or nighttime. And he doesn't use any weapon except his own sharp claws. But I don't know. Isn't it a little funnier to be like, you could have done this, but I like your option too. That's very good. So.
I had very funny storytellers in my life. My grandmothers, my uncles, my aunts told me these stories, my own parents. had a real irreverence and a real sense of humor that I have deeply incorporated into my parenting. My teenagers will, insist that I'm the 12-year-old and they're the older ones because I tend to make a lot of jokes. And I did, when they were younger and I was writing the first of the series, run all of the ridiculous riddles by them. And if they rolled their eyes and said, "Mom," then I knew that I was on the right track because, right? I knew that the joke was, silly enough, was getting there. I think that joy is a really important way to poke fun at, but also point out systems of oppression, right? Joy and humor are really important ways, I think, to think about unfair things in this world. Whether it's racism or sexism or anything else. I think that one of the first reactions I had when I was trying to sell The Serpent's Secret, it took me almost 10 years to find somebody who could wrap their heads around a brown, humorous, adventurous girl, of South Asian descent. And the feedback I would always get was as follows. They would say, "Oh, well, we love your voice, but, try to write a more realistic fiction, serious story about, this immigrant daughter's oppression." And which was code word for like sadness, like make her sadder. Like she's a brown girl, make her sadder. And I was like, I'm a brown girl. I'm not a sad person. And you know what? Those stories are out there. It's not that stories of sadness or difficulty aren't important, but some stories have more cultural kind of, space. And I felt like at the time that I was writing stories about joy and humor and brown kids being funny and irreverent, didn't have that space. And those are the stories that I wanted to tell. So yeah, wit and humor are just really important parts of my life. But to me, they're also really subversive. So I like to play with them a lot.
I love that.
So the time has come in this interview to discuss an important topic. We're going to talk about New Jersey.
Yay!
Yes, right, because both characters in the book, they have connections to New Jersey. One begins in New Jersey in Parsippany, and another, a group of intrepid adventurers, end up in Edison, New Jersey. So since we are broadcasting from the Garden State today, could you please tell us your connections to New Jersey?
Oh, well, for me, I think I spent most of my summers, like half of them were in New Jersey where my aunt and uncle live. And I remember, I would drag my feet about going to Edison but then I would be excited because then we could, get the bootlegged India Bollywood movies and that kind of stuff. And then I'd be really excited because then I could go eat dosa and I loved that. But then I'd also have to get the clothes and that wasn't so great. But then my dada would get me rose or faluda and then it was okay again. So there's something about Edison that lives in my head as just this place of food and joyousness and loudness and contradiction. It was the place that bookended so many of our trips because we would, start at the summertime, like, okay, let's go eat. We'll go get your favorite ice cream. We'll go get the rose faluda that you love. And then at the end of the trip, it would be like, oh crap, here's all the things we forgot. You need clothes for this. Garba's coming up, blah, blah, blah. Go in, go grab all your stuff and then leave again. And so I just wanted to nod to that because it's a very special place to me.
Love it. Well, I'm a Jersey girl. I was born in Ohio, yes. So, anyone from the Midwest, that is where I spent my early years. But I went from 8th grade on, I moved in 8th grade to New Jersey. So I went to middle school and high school in New Jersey, in Montville, New Jersey, which is next to Parsippany, New Jersey. But if you were writing a story, wouldn't you pick the name Parsippany? So it just sounds like a great place, right? It sounds like a great place. It's also a place with a big South Asian population. So I chose Kiran Mala to begin her adventure in New Jersey. And New Jersey was such an important part of it. Like we were talking about humor and sass. New Jersey was such an important part of my books that I asked, hold on, let me try to find it real quick. So they sent me this beautiful chapter art. And the chapter art at the beginning of all the chapters, it was very like flowy and scroll-like, and it looked very serious. And I said, this is not that serious a book. I don't want kids to get the wrong idea here. There's a lot of demon snot and like silly riddles and jokes happening here. Can we like humor up these very fancy, serious looking, like alpona, looking scrolls? And I don't know if the young viewers watching this can see. Am I close enough? So they snuck in. I don't know if you can tell what that little bean-shaped thing is. People from New Jersey, what's the bean-shaped state? There's little New Jerseys in all the chapter headings. So I told you there were little secret things, throughout the books. And one of them is, like, if you're a kid from, I don't know, Minnesota reading these books, you can get a lot of pleasure out of them, but I'm not sure you'd recognize necessarily the New Jersey stuck in the chapter headings. But New Jersey kids will recognize the New Jersey stuck in the chapter headings. So yes, New Jersey is a very important part of these books. On the back of the first book, it even has a line that Kieran Mullis says, which is, "In the name of the Garden State Parkway, I am not a princess." And so that's one of our taglines for this series. In fact, the first thing I wanted to call it was the Turnpike Princess. But the very kind and undoubtedly correct folks at Scholastic were afraid that no one outside of New Jersey would know what the Turnpike was. So, alas, my New Jersey centric view of the series was, was altered.
Sounds like you could turn that into an epic poem. Honestly.
In the name of the Garden State Parkway.
Oh my gosh, I love both the Garden State Parkway and the Turnpike references. So much of my life has been spent debating between the two and checking various, traffic reports to determine which one to go on. So resonant. So New Jersey is source material, but there's source material that's a little bit farther east than New Jersey even. And so I want to ask both of you to talk a little bit about the spirituality and the kind of explicitly religious, in cases where there are explicitly sort of religious sources that you're working with. I know, Roshani, you've talked about the Arusha series explicitly drawing from Hindu source material. Sayantani, we've actually spoken about how you very intentionally went another route and how it's important to you that the folklores the Bengali folklore that you draw from is secular and has resonance across the faith spectrum and to folks who don't identify with a particular faith. I'm wondering, though, beyond even religion, it seems to me that both book series really speak to a kind of a deep foundation of spirituality and meaning making. And I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about how spirituality and meaning making shows up in each of the series. And Roshani, would you start us off?
Sure. I love that question. And I think that it really celebrates something that I hope readers find at the heart of the Arusha series. So when I grew up and my ba was telling me these tales, probably my favorite aspect about them was that the lines between good and evil were very, very blurred. You can have heroes who are capable of extremely villainous things. I mean, I remember I've read a couple scholarly articles that talks about the role of Sri Krishna as an almost antagonist in the Mahabharata, which is very interesting to me. And then you can have villains who are capable of great acts of heroism. I mean, like, to me as a kid, it was always in the Ramayana, there's the tale of the demon king, Ravana, who's got 10 heads. And as a kid, I was just like, my gosh, that's a lot of pillows. And does he have to floss all of the heads too? My God, it's your whole day gone, just taking care of the upkeep of everything. Maybe he is not quite as vain as I am, which is okay. But I remember my ba telling me that the reason why he has 10 heads is because he had demonstrated a level of piety and had kept like beheading himself to just prove his devotion. And at the time, I remember thinking like, oh my God, I hope nobody tests my devotion in such a way. What if it doesn't come back? And I'm just stuck. So that was something that really interested me, because it's only through the telling of stories that we really get a sense of who is a hero. It depends on who's telling you the tale. It even depends on who survives to tell you the tale. And one of my favorite things about the Mahabharata specifically is the fact that it contains the Bhagavad Gita. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a beautiful scripture, and it's essentially a conversation between Krishna and Arjun, who's one of the heroes and is I guess some people might consider him the main Pandava brother. And he's on the battlefield and he's looking at all the people that he loves. And he's just like, I can't do this. I can't fight these people that I love. I don't really want to have a war. You know what? Let's just go home. And it becomes this really beautiful conversation about duty and about the actions that you take, how you make peace with yourself, especially. And I really, really connected to Arjun's doubt throughout the Sanskrit epic. I thought that it was really believable, really human, that someone who has these legendary powers is at the same time feeling paralyzed by the insecurity of whether or not they're doing the right thing. And to me, that was something that was really important and truly at the heart of the Arusha series. What does it mean to make the right choice? And one thing that we've been doing throughout the series, and that I'm really, really grateful that Disney has been so supportive of, is highlighting the minor characters. In all these stories, I remember sometimes my ba would tell me a story like, oh yeah, there's this one heavenly nymph, and I guess she had a relationship with someone who she shouldn't have, so she became a rock for 10,000 years. Anyway, I'm just like, okay, hold on, a rock for 10,000 years for one mistake. And you notice in these stories how women are inordinately punished. And so I really, really wanted to excavate that, give reason behind it, and maybe even exonerate some of them. So that's the end of wisdom.
That's beautifully said. I mean, my take is slightly different because I went to folk tales, and although I'm not going to deny that, my own upbringing, and certainly, in some aspects, as a Bengali, the Mahabharata plays a big role in the stories that I knew inside of me growing up. So I'm not saying that those stories didn't seep in, but I tried actually to be careful to stay away from more spiritually oriented stories, and really rely primarily, at least in the Kiranmala series, on folk stories that were shared by communities of different faiths. And there was a reason. The reason is that I'm a granddaughter of people who were deeply involved in the Indian Revolution. My own grandfather went to jail at 15 for his role in the Chittagong Armory raid. My children are older than 15. I can't imagine somebody feeling that strongly about a concept called freedom to give up their own freedom at age 15. And for 7 years, he was in jail. He finished high school and college, I believe, in jail. He was one of the oldest living Indian freedom fighters, still recognized by the India government when he died in his 90s. There were multiple such revolutionary characters in my family. And as Bengalis, but even, as folks, I guess, living in that revolutionary time, a secular feeling was really important to my family members, because they saw how much violence and cruelty had been perpetrated between religious communities that till a week before, a month before, a year before, had been brothers, sisters living together in harmony. And so they saw that, religious, difference can, when exacerbated, can be the root of a lot of pain, and has been the root of a lot of pain in South Asia. And in fact, those revolutionary ancestors are who influenced my forthcoming book, Force of Fire. But I heard, my grandfather's voice in my head saying, before I'm a Hindu, I'm an Indian. Before anything else, my spirituality is freedom. Before anything else, I stand up for my fellow human being, be they of whatever faith background. And so for me, it was really important that I actually celebrate stories that we as Bengalis used to be one big region. We got split down the middle. My family originally lived on the side that's now Bangladesh. They had to become refugees and immigrate over to India. Many families had to do it the opposite direction, simply based on what their religious, family history was. And so I wanted to actually celebrate stories that united Bengalis, be they Muslim, be they Indian, be they originally from this side of the river or that side of the river, be they diasporic, be they Buddhist or Christian or Jewish or atheist. I wanted to celebrate those stories that are tying us together as people of multiple faiths or not. But certainly there was actually, it's actually kind of a spiritual reason that secularism was so important to my family. And that was one of the reasons that I tried to be careful. I'm not saying that I was entirely successful. You can only write from what you know. But that was my intention.
Oh, thank you so much. I love the idea of the spirituality of freedom, the spirituality of justice, the spirituality of coming forward and supporting, your fellow human being or your fellow living being. What beautiful ideas. Thank you so much. Dana?
So before we get to the Q&A from our listeners, I would love to hear what each of you are working on now, if you don't mind sharing what's coming up and what's next.
So for me, the Arsha book 4 in the 5-book series just came out. So that was Arsha and the City of Gold. And the next one will be out in spring. I just finished my draft of it. I am seriously tired. Yes, there it is. Probably my favorite cover out of the series so far.
It's a good cover. It's really good.
So that's wrapped up. And my series or my trilogy, The Gilded Wolves, is finishing this September. So if you like National Treasure, but wanted someone other than Nicolas Cage in it, I've got the book for you. It's in 19th century Paris. And that is no shade to Nicolas Cage. I actually dedicated the second book to him. So I hope he sees that. And that's about, that's pretty much all I'm working on. Fun stuff.
So I already talked about Force of Fire, which is set in the same multiverse as the Kiranmala books, but it's the story of Pinky, right? Beneath you referenced Pinky, who's an adult in the Kiranmala books. She was a very demanding character. And she was like, hello, I need my own story. I need to be central. And so she has 2 books coming out, the first of which is coming out June 1st, and the second of which will come out next year. So she has 2 standalone books. So even if you haven't read the Kiranmala books, you can start with Force of Fire, start with Pinky's story. But her story is, yes, Bengali folktale inspired, but also very deeply anti-colonial inspired and Indian Revolution inspired, as I was saying before. I wanted to honor these stories of my family members. So that's coming out shortly, June 1st. The next book I actually have coming out is my YA debut next year, which I'm really excited about because unlike Roshani, I've been only writing middle grade this whole time. My YA debut is a feminist Bengali speech and debate reimagining of my favorite novel, Pride and Prejudice. So it's called Debating Darcy. And Lizzie is Leela Bose, a Bengali American. And Darcy, Fitzwilliam Darcy is Feroz Darcy, a Pakistani British American guy. And yeah, that's coming out next year. And I am like terribly excited about it.
I'm terribly excited about it.
Right? It's a speech and debate, Indian Pride and Prejudice, or they see Pride and Prejudice you never knew you needed.
People don't think debate's very romantic, but it is. I mean, like, yeah, I don't know. I was in debate. I was a deeply embarrassing human being. I remember this guy that was like moving into our neighborhood. And of course, like our South Asian neighborhood was just gossiping like wild, like, va, is very smart because his parents are doctors, etc. You know, looking at me like, why do you keep giving us C's? Anyway, and I saw him the very first day of school. And because I'd been watching his house being built all summer, I yelled at him, "Hey, you, I know where you live," really loudly. So
is this your husband?
It's my husband.
I'm like, wait a minute, is this your current husband? Like your husband? You just yelled at him? That was your initial meeting?
Yeah, that's how we carpooled for a year. He didn't talk to me. He would just put in his earbuds and just pretend that I didn't exist. But then we'd have to hang out because debate, and also because I knew where he lived. So obviously, carpool.
That sounds very Lizzie Bennet, Fitzwilliam Darcy to me. See? You proved my point.
I like that idea. I feel like I really Edward Cullen him. I just kept showing up and I was like, love me. So okay, it's fine.
Okay, we're going to go on to the Q&A, and we have quite a few. So our first is Harini, who is age 12, who is celebrating her birthday on Sunday. So happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Would like to ask both of you, do you have a process for coming up with and or selecting names for characters?
Ooh.
Sometimes I rely on the original folktales. Nil Kamal, Lal Kamal, Kiran Mala. In Force the Fire, which is my new book, there are these baby Rakshasa called, whose names I got from a very silly childhood Bengali song. If there are any Bengali speakers out there, the Rakshasa are called Kachkola, which is raw banana or underripe banana, Kanmala, which means to turn somebody's ear, and Dimbo. So there's a Bengali song that I heard growing up that had those words in it. And I'm sure any Bengali, who's heard that song will recognize these names. So sometimes they're from silly places, like songs I heard growing up, and sometimes they're from folk tales, and sometimes I just like the meaning. Like I want to talk about the moon, so that character's Chandni, like that.
I love that. For me, I like to pick names that have emotional resonance in the plot. So it takes me a while to find them. When I was writing at home, because I deferred, I was in law school for a year, then I deferred, and then I dropped out because I had gotten my first book deal. And it was always really nerve-wracking for my dad, especially because I leave my laptop up and it's just pages of baby names. And he'd just be like, I'm like, oh, it's a character. He's like, okay. That's usually where I get my names from, or I just ask a friend if I can steal theirs, and usually they say yes.
All right, next question, and I do apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name. Luna, age 11, Sakshi, age 10, and Jay, age 13, and also Sri Moye would like to know more about the use of Indian mythology and how you infuse it into our modern world, and what do you like most about Asian Indian mythology?
You want to take it, Rishi?
Okay. All right. What do I like the most about it? I think I've said what I like the most about it. I like its ambiguity, its moral ambiguity. It's very satisfying to write characters that come from that tradition. And in terms of trying to make something modern or accessible or funny, I mean, for example, what is it? I think it's Arishan, the Tree of Wishes. There's these mythological creatures called chakra birds. And these chakra birds, they feed off of the moonlight, and they love the moonlight. And it just sounded, so beautiful. But then I was thinking to myself, like, if this bird's like a moth and like really likes light, would it be wouldn't it be funny if maybe they just like randomly fall in love with flashlights or car headlights or phones that don't like walk? And so I just wrote this just Shakespearean tragic romantic bird that's just like, what light, what sought from yonder window breaks. It is a car headlamp. It died. Damn, never mind. and things like that make me giggle. So I put them in the books.
I love that. I have a bird named Dunduni who is a very popular bird in folktales who's similarly very dramatic.
Everybody loves a bird.
Yeah, this is my little nod to him today. Rock star bird.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. I love modernizing folktales and giving them a tongue-in-cheek kind of a twist. Because again, like that's what oral stories were, I'm sure my grandma was not the only one adapting them to teach us lessons, right? There were ways to learn lessons, like how does one become brave? Or what do you owe your family members? Or who are you? How do you figure out, like, who am I? How do I figure out, what my identity is? And in a sense, those stories are all maps that are adjustable and we can stick ourselves in and try them on and figure out our own answers to those questions, but through these stories. And so when I say stories are maps, I don't mean they're like a one-to-one map. They're not a Google map, like you start in Edison and you end up in Parsippany or whatever. It's more like a moving map. Like in the Kieran Molly series, there's moving maps that move around. Yeah. So stories are like moving maps. They're places that you can try on ideas. They're places that even we in the modern world can look to ancient stories to figure out, like, what's important to me? How am I going to be a good person in this world? Like these really fundamental questions that we're asking ourselves now that people asked themselves 500 years ago. And we can use stories, but stories that are flexible, that allow us to insert ourselves into them to do that sort of important work. So that's why I like taking folktales and putting them in modern times.
So this next one is for Roshani. This is from Sawyer, age 11. At the start of Arusha in the City of Gold, she saw the book that Sal and Gabby Break the Universe by Carlos Hernandez. And the reader was amused because I remember when I read Sal and Gabby Break the Universe, it mentioned Arusha. Did you write that on purpose?
I did write that on purpose. Carlos Hernandez is a fabulously gifted author. I love the Sal and Gabby Universe series. And honestly, I'm very, very friendly with all of my Rick Riordan Presents co-authors. I mean, we're not even co-authors, I guess, family members, essentially. We whenever we get to hang out, we have a riot. And so we're always trying to, make subtle nods at each other's work. And actually we have a anthology coming out in, I don't know when, maybe August, I think. It's called The Cursed Carnival. And it's a little bit of like multiverse hopping. So I hope it's fun for readers.
Oh, nice. I was literally with Carlos this week. We did an event together. Yes. And we're both teachers, who teach in colleges and also write fantasy. So we were talking about what does it mean? Like, what's the role of fantasy in college and in academia? And so that was a really fun discussion this week. So hi,
Carlos. So Aurora, age 12, asked Sayantani, why did Neil have so many fangirls? And how do they have technology?
How do the fangirls have technology? Well, tell me the truth. Don't you think Neil deserves some fangirls? Neil's a pretty cool character. He's kind of a suave character. Although those fangirls are a little over the top, right? When you say they're chasing him around, threatening to eat his feet and stuff. So yeah, that flying fangirls chapter from The Serpent's Secret was literally my favorite chapter to write. And here's a secret from The Serpent's Secret. The first time I wrote the book, so writing is rewriting for all of you readers out there. Writing is rewriting is rewriting. And just like your teacher might give you edits to help you make your book better, we have people called editors who help us make our book better. And my editor, on reading, this book the first or 10th time, said to me, I think there's something that's needed in between these two chapters. And so I put in the Flying Fangirls chapter like at the very end. The story had already been written, and it's my absolutely favorite chapter, because who doesn't want like rock kush monster fangirls chasing them across the universe, threatening weird stuff to them? And I guess they have technology, or they have, other powers because they're magical, right? And just because you're magical doesn't mean you don't use your magic towards silly ends, like being a fangirl, as these characters do. And of course, one of the flying fangirls ends up showing up again in Game of Stars. And she's very embarrassed that she's chased Neil around the universe, threatening to eat his toes. But thanks, I'm glad you liked the Flying Fangirls.
Along these lines, can I just please pop in a question about Aiden's smolder powers? I want to hear, speak to the smolder powers, please.
Oh my gosh. Well, so Aiden is half Apsara. And usually in a lot of these stories, Apsaras are sent to disturb a sage's meditation before they get too powerful. They are like beautiful, gifted heavenly nymphs. They're the dancers in King Indra's court. And they have just, they have these hypnotic powers of their own because they're so beautiful. And I thought it would be really interesting that instead of giving that traditionally feminine sort of energy to a female character, what would happen if I just gave it to this 12-year-old boy who's just like, I'm attractive, stop looking at me. It's like deeply uncomfortable by it. So I just, one, thought it was funny, and two, I thought that there's a discussion to be had about people who don't want to be manipulated like that. And I think that Aiden was a really fun, and he's a very sensitive character. Like, he dreads this power because he thinks it's non-consensual. Nobody asked to like fall madly in love with him because of his lightning smolder. But if he can keep your attention long enough so that Aru and the rest of the potatoes can just sneak by and go do other things, he's like, well, just this once, kind of thing. So that was.
Do you think it's possible to smolder in a carpool with earbuds in while ignoring someone?
I mean, I certainly fell victim to it.
Yes.
I think that he noticed.
All right, our next question is from Mahura, age 10. And she asked both of you if any of your characters in the books are based on real people, citing examples of the parents of your two heroines.
My parents, Kieran Muller's parents, aren't exactly based on my parents. They don't do what my parents do. They don't have all the same characteristics, but the thing they do have in common with my parents, and that's the heart of why I wrote them like that, is Kieran Muller's parents are wildly, ridiculously, way over the top loving of her. They just love her to pieces, like to an embarrassing degree, which maybe at the time, Kieran Muller's 12, she sometimes appreciates and sometimes doesn't. But as an adult, when you grow up with parents like that who just adore you ridiculously, not that they let you get away with stuff. I'm not sure that Kieran Muller's parents let her get away with stuff. My parents were fairly, strict. I had to do certain things, but man, it is a real gift to be brought up with that much ridiculous, buoyant, over-the-top love. And as an adult, I really appreciate it. So that's, those characters are definitely based on my parents, that part of them.
I love that. I would say that there's an element of pretty much everybody that I love and all of my characters, but I don't try to make anybody just 100% carbon copy of anything. I mean, even Aru, who have given a lot of my own experiences to, a lot of my own personality traits to, whatever, like the things that happen to her in that book make her a completely different human being. So yeah. Although I will say that I have written into the book a monster crab named after my brother because he kept bothering me when I was on deadline. And I was like, if you keep annoying me, I swear to God, I'm going to turn you into a little monster crab. And he was like, do it, I dare you. I did it. So that was fun for me and horrific for him.
How do you keep up the energy of writing these extremely long series, multiple books, tons of characters, so much action, lots of description? How do you stay focused, organized, and energetic for each of you?
Oh, boy.
And if the answer is like coffee and, gummy worms, okay, that's acceptable.
Yeah. For me, at least, I mean, I don't recommend the schedule that I've had for the past couple of years, writing 2 books a year and then, promoting 2 books a year, though I'm extremely grateful to be able to do it. The way that I would keep the series straight in my head was one, having different candles. I think I wrote the Aru Shah series mostly to a candle that smelled like tomatoes, or was it the Gilded Wolves that smelled like was the tomato candle book? I can't remember. One of them was a tomato candle book. And that's not to say that this candle smelled like marinara sauce. It smelled like really good dirt. And I don't know why, but for me, that was like, yes, an excellent book shall arise from this fertile ground. Anyway, so that was one thing. Scent memory really helped. Using a program called Scrivener has been immensely helpful to me in keeping things organized. And then also, part of it is just the love and joy of getting to spend time with these characters and knowing how much you love them. And that truly, after a while, they just take on a life of their own and do whatever they want. And the other thing, of course, that keeps me focused and grounded is the fact that my husband is a resident with many years ahead of him and I have a mortgage. So here we are.
Okay.
The doctor theme continues in that, so my initial job, I've had several, my initial training is that I'm a pediatrician, I'm a kids doctor. And I think that's, honestly, I don't think I knew it then, but that's why I write for kids now. Because if you love young people's overall health, you also love their imaginations, their minds, their hearts. You want to keep those things healthy too. I'm a mom. I also teach full-time. I teach college students, but they're not that different than the young folks I write for, to be honest. And now I write for kids or young people. And all those things kind of come from the same place for me, that they come from that same heart place. And I'll tell you the truth, that I don't know, it's hard and it's exhausting to have multiple jobs at the same time, but I'm much more productive when I'm teaching, and then on my drive home from campus, when I would drive home from campus, I'm thinking about what I'm going to write that afternoon. Or, the days that I'm on campus, I'm just doing teachy stuff, and the days that I'm home, I'm just doing writerly stuff. For me, having the balance really keeps me going. And if I teach I teach about illness and disability and fairly serious topics, and I do a lot of academic work, and then to be able to turn around and write about joy and adventure is enormously filling, and vice versa, right? And vice versa. Being able to think about hard topics, but sneak them into the book right next to the demon snot is also really fulfilling, right? Thinking about children's fantasy in academia, academics and children's fantasy, it all feeds each other. And of course, being a mom, I get to try out all my stories and jokes on my kids. They roll their eyes, but they're still very helpful.
So we have a question from a couple of our attendees. So this comes from Chokshi and from Jason. They both asked, what do you think would happen if Kiranmala and Aru were to meet each other?
Ooh,
That's some powerful fan fiction there. Right?
I know.
Such a question.
And that's some multiverse hopping, but the precedent is there for multiverse hopping.
Started here.
Into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, They really might. The multiverse might, resonate with some good trouble or some bad trouble, as the case may be.
True. Yeah. But I think they would just be sassy and tackling, and I would love to be along with them, but then I'd also be really scared. So, where are we going? What are you doing?
And for you fan fiction lovers and the two kids who asked that question, try writing it. Go for it.
Exactly.
Yes, please do.
Exactly. We want to read it.
Well, we've got some budding authors. We've also got some detectives at work. So Adita, age 13, asks a question this is directed to Roshani. Roshani, could you give us some hint about something in the nectar of immortality so that we can stick it up on a pinboard along with the other clues to analyze them and come up with theories?
Yeah, you guys are really sneaky. I hadn't imagined, like I'll be taking an Instagram story thing of like my cat, but there's like a corner of the draft that appears and someone zooming in just being like, chapter 41 is called. That's very flattering. Okay, something that's in the nectar of immortality. I gave myself nightmares because I literally wrote nightmares. Because like a mare is a female horse, and I thought, oh, what if like these dreams were actually horses? But then what kind of names would they have? So they were like inexplicable natural disaster, loose teeth, clown chasing you at a party, things like that. And it does become important in the story, but it was interesting to think. I got a lot of nightmares. So that's a hint. There's horses. They're not that great.
That is both a hint and a very disturbing seed that you just planted. So we apologize if anyone has some nightmares tonight. You can blame Roshani. On a slightly more serious note, a question about pushback. Have either of you heard pushback or criticisms of your work? And if so, how have you responded?
Sayantani?
I ignore all Goodreads reviews. I just don't go on this. There's this place called Goodreads for younger people who may not know, where sometimes people are really lovely and really nice, and sometimes they're not. And my ego doesn't need that. Mostly what I do is I try to listen with my heart to readers. In the days before, I got to meet lots of readers. Now I get to meet them over Zoom. And make sure that, the stories are speaking to them. And mostly those have been, the pushback I get is of the following sort. Very important pushback. Are Kieran and Neil going to hold hands? Are they going to hug? And then it's like often like really outraged. Is there like, are we going to ship them? Is there like, do we know that they're together, or are they just like kind of, I'm like, they're 12. So most of my pushback honestly has been about Neil and Kieran and how explicitly, like, do they know do they like each other, or do they just kind of like each other? And there's a lot of that. I don't know if this is pushback, but lots of people ask me if they can star in the non-existent movie. So that's mostly what I get asked about, to tell you the truth.
I love that. I'm gonna star in the movie.
And I'm like, if you can make the movie, you can star in the movie. There's no movie right now.
Oh my gosh. I also get I get so many questions about Aru and Aiden, and about a character that readers will meet or have already met if you've read Arusha and the City of Gold. But on a personal level, I don't always hear the nicest things about my work. Either some people accuse it as pandering to white audiences. I don't know how that makes sense. Like it was written for joy. It was written for fun. There's some people who think that it's very sacrilegious to have done that. But again, I'm not the first person to interact or want to engage with ancient stories. And I hope I'm certainly not the last. And then, and this is not always a nice thing, but And I wonder how many of you in the audience are more than one ethnicity. So I'm Gujarati and I'm also Filipino. And when I was growing up, I was told that basically I really wasn't enough of either thing. I didn't look like either of my parents. I didn't speak either of their native languages. And so for me, the way in which I connected with my heritage was through stories and through comic books like Amar Chitrakatha, which I loved so much, and through the ghost tip stories that my mother would tell me about the Philippines. And for those of you who are mixed, I just want you to know that you don't have to prove anything to anybody. Those stories, that heritage is yours. The way that you come by it is yours. And nobody can ask you to point on the map of your soul where this came from. You don't have to point at your scars to justify why a certain trauma may appear in your work. It is your own lived experience. You are the only person who gets to control what you do with that. So, and similar to Sayantani, I don't look at Goodreads. It's not good for my ego. Then I get sad. So I stay off of it because frankly, like, what does it matter? The things that you hear about how people respond to your work, unless they're responding to the fact that, hey, you really messed up, then yes, like professionally, and also just as a duty to your readers, you owe them an apology. You owe them the time to do it better. And to do your best not to do any harm. For me, I utilize a lot of sensitivity readers. There's a lot of research that goes into the stories, but I am human and I do make mistakes and I do want to be held accountable for them. But beyond that, it's like what I said at the beginning. When a story is written, it no longer belongs to me. It belongs to you. And what you get out of it is, frankly, none of my business.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. As you were speaking, Roshani, I was just so struck by the idea of like hybridity and fluidity and hyphenated identities. And I think we see that so like amazingly on display with both Kiranmala and Arusha sort of discovering these hyphenated identities and looking at them as curses and then maybe coming to appreciate them as blessings. And, you know, I can only imagine that that resonates with your own lived experiences. It certainly resonates with mine. I'd like to ask a very delicate question. We don't shy away from controversy at the Hindu Life program at Princeton or the Katz's Children Library or the Princeton Public Library. So I'm just going to go for it. This comes from Divyanka, and the question reads, Skittles or M&Ms?
Oh,
M&Ms. Divyanka, I hope you're with me on this. M&Ms.
What's M&M stand for? Because now I'm thinking of this.
I don't know.
I'm like thinking of this line that it's like from a 50 Cent song that was popular when I was in college, and I'm not going to repeat it. It's not appropriate. But like,
would you please repeat? No. Okay.
I can think about. Anyway, God, I'm so curious now where M&Ms came from. Frankly, I don't know. I like Skittles. I really only like M&Ms when they're like sort of room temperature, and then that sort of like defeats the purpose of them. But I like Skittles, and I like when you like eat them all at once, and they just become like this like gray mass in your mouth, and you're just like, "Tah."
I'm going on Goodreads right now, and I'm going to criticize Roshani because that is a wrong take. I'm sorry, people. She's wrong.
Canceled.
M&Ms. I don't want to even hear it.
I just have to, I love that, you know, we are an hour and almost an hour and 20 minutes into the webinar. And this is the point that you two actually take off the gloves and start to duke it out, right? It has nothing to do with your characters, your books. It is M&Ms and Skittles, the eternal debate.
It comes down to fruit and chocolate. You know, it's chocolate.
It's chocolate. And
chocolate
is the real fruit, man.
Yeah. Fruit is candy.
I really like Rolos, but I'm not. But I really like those Airhead things. Like, I don't know why, like, especially the ones that are like the mystery flavor. It's white. I was like, ooh, it's white. I would be so happy when I ate it. I don't know. It didn't taste better, but in my head, it did.
Can I vote for like the vegan version of M&Ms and Skittles that like are like overpriced and found at the health food store that like look terrible because they use like natural like beet juice as a
like
dye
cacao and beet juice. Yeah.
Or am I just going to be like the loser kid that everyone makes fun of on this webinar?
What is it? Yeah, you have to say it.
Is there a brand like that?
There are a couple of brands like that. Yeah.
I like that your face got really serious.
I had this thought. I was like, am I allowed to endorse a vegan brand? But you guys just endorse M&Ms and Skittles.
Yeah,
So
by the way, M&Ms, y'all can send me whatever prizes you want for mentioning M&Ms on this webinar.
Yeah.
All right, I'll endorse the candy that I like. They're called Unreals. They're 100% vegan. You can find them at Whole Foods, Whole Earth Center if you're local to Princeton, or look them up online. But they're really good. They're basically like M&Ms, but just plant-based and yummy and overpriced.
But here's the real question.
Oh my God.
If something is a mystery flavor, do they actually manufacture a mystery flavor at the candy plant? Or do they just randomly select different mystery flavors from the product lines and throw the wrapper on them?
I think it's the latter. But the thing to me was, because Airheads are different colors, and then this one was just like this gleaming chemical pearl, and I was just like, I must eat it. So immediately, yeah.
So may I ask a question about your readers, since they're here and we've been talking to them? Can you share a story or two about readers who have come to you with very emotional stories? I have one myself about, I hope I don't get this wrong, it's crossing a bridge of remembrance and of the dead. And it almost reads like a poem in the book, this italicized of people speaking of all the things that they regret. I should have, I could have, why didn't I? That really struck me, especially at a time now with so much going on. So are there other readers who have come to each of you to share a really touching story?
I mean, I think, Roshani, you referred in the beginning, did you use the metaphor of the mirror or the window in the beginning, right? You said, and so, right, that's Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who is a professor emeritus at Ohio State University, and she talks about books being windows, right, into somebody else's experience, mirrors, right, that you can see yourself in the book, and sliding glass doors, spaces, stories allow you to enter new worlds, right? So I wrote the Kieran Mala series for a mirror reason, meaning I didn't see myself when I was growing up. My kid comes to me at age 8 and says, I love fantasy, but there are no kids who look like me in fantasy. And so I write the series for that mirror purpose, in order that my kids don't have to have that same experience that I did, which is not seeing themselves in stories. Mm-hmm. So a beautiful response that I've gotten is the mirror response. Kids will run up to me or write me notes and say, I eat rasagullas too, or I, call my father Baba too, or that story was familiar to me. What I didn't realize, and what I find very moving, is the window aspect of it, which is kids will run up to me, some kids who share some qualities with Kieran Mala, like they're not South Asian, but they're immigrants from somewhere else, their families are from somewhere else, or maybe somebody runs up to me who has ostensibly nothing in common with Kieran Mala. Maybe it's a gaggle of like blonde boys run up to me. And they say, oh, we love Kieran Mala. She's so funny. And then this happened and the demons not happen. And I guess what I didn't realize was how moved I would be by this issue of representation working in all different ways. I think the more shiny that glass is, the more you can see yourself in it, but the more others can see through it and see something of themselves still there. I think it's really moving to think of people who don't look like Kieran Mala, who maybe have seen themselves in stories, deciding, hey, Arusha or Kieran Mala is my new favorite hero. And that's who I want to be when I dress up for Halloween, or that's a model of heroism that I want to follow. And that's been unexpected, but really, really beautiful for me.
That was brilliant. What she said. Basically, literally just this almost exact same experience. And I love how you described and articulated that. Yeah, the most humbling thing is a reader telling me that they're able to see themselves in my work. And then just being reminded again that the work is not just for one child. It is for all people. I hope it's for all kids, with ultimately the point being that there's so much more that unites us than separates us. And so of course, I hope all of you find something joyous in our works. And I think that sort of speaks sometimes to this idea that non-Western fantasy is almost written to the exclusion of others, when it's not. It's just like us pulling up a chair to this table and saying, make room, tuck in your elbows, we're here too.
Yeah. And in the same way, like, I didn't see myself in these stories. That doesn't mean I was a huge reader. One of my favorite books is Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. I go back to it all the time.
Yes.
I'm a doctor who became a writer. Science and stories, they go together like M&Ms and only M&Ms. Like chocolate and peanuts in M&Ms.
Right.
But I didn't see myself in that story. That doesn't mean I don't love Meg. That doesn't mean I don't love those characters. It just means, in addition, I wanted to see, other sorts of characters. But similarly, I hope that the more specific we make these stories, the more universal they become, right? The more that everybody can then see themselves in them.
Absolutely.
And I know that sounds contradictory, but I actually think the more really, really specific you get, the more universal you can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree.
We've got a question from Leela, who's 8 years old, and very astutely observes that in both book series, you have main characters whose fathers are bad guys. So what made you decide to do that?
For me, I think that a villain is really I got that wrong. A hero is only as strong as their villain. And I really, really love the idea that throughout Hindu mythology, the villain is the hero of their own story. And so I thought that in writing The Sleeper the way that I did, there was a lot for Aru to see crossover, to see examples of herself, to feel that level of like doubt and insecurity, because ultimately the Sleeper's arc is one that is like quintessential to the line, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Every single time I've written anything to his perspective, I feel heartbroken. And I just really resonated with this idea that, we will do so much for the people that we love, but at what cost to ourselves? And at what point do we become the villain?
Mm. I'm gonna just add a little addendum and say, actually, Kiran Mala's father is a wonderful man. It's Baba. Yes, it's her adopted father, but Kiran Mala's parents are the people who brought her up. And so Ma and Baba are wonderful, loving, slightly silly, kind of over the top people, but they're great people. The person who's the villain is her biological father. And there's this trope, this tradition in fantasy sometimes, some kinds of fantasy, where here a character finds their biological parents and suddenly like forgets about these people who brought them up and becomes just like their biological parents, like because of blood or like genes or magic or something. And I gotta tell you, as a doctor and as somebody who teaches race and ethnicity studies, I hate that idea. I hate that idea. I don't like the idea that like blood will tell and like there's things like bad blood and good blood. Like people are good because the people who raised them to be good and loved them. And so yes, Kiran Mala's biological dad is a bad guy. But what I was doing, and her mom and her biological mom is kind of, she's not bad. She's just kind of flaky, right? She's just a little, like she's neglectful, which is also bad. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to honor how much her adoptive parents are her parents and are the people who love her. And the biological parents, like, yes, she has to figure that out. She has to acknowledge those parts of herself. but they're not her parents, right? Her parents are the people who love her and brought her up.
I love that.
Such a beautiful note. I think we could go on, and at the same time, we have arrived at the end of our time. I do want to ask, although we are at the end of our time, I do want to ask everyone's indulgence if we do go over just for a few minutes, because as some folks have put into the Q&A box and has certainly been on my mind and on my heart, perhaps there's something that should be said as we speak about drawing from South Asia and South Asian stories and traditions, to acknowledge the heartbreak of what's happening right now with COVID just ravaging the region, and the suffering, the very real pain, and what can also translate over into the diaspora as feelings of fear and anxiety and helplessness and frustration. And so while it's perhaps an atypical note to end on, and perhaps something a little bit more sobering and heavy than conversations like this sometimes are, if the two of you, as these remarkable, inspiring South Asian American authors and thought leaders, if you could just maybe say a few words to everyone listening live and listening on the recording about your own, what you'd like to put out there as far as what we can do to help.
Oh boy, Sayantani, I think you and I are both part of the same auction that's like having auction items that we're trying to raise money in order to send relief aid to India. And of course, the name is now escaping my brain. Do you remember the name?
You know what? I actually, and I'll tell you why I'm not involved in the auction. It's because I have family members who are ill and struggling right now. And I've been, and I missed like the deadline to submit something to that particular auction, which is called, I know it's a UNICEF-oriented auction, and I don't remember the name of it.
Books for Hope. Found it.
There you go.
Very good.
I have been donating to kolkatafoundation.org, which is in Kolkata spelled Kolkata, Kolkata Foundation, which works on the ground in Kolkata and Calcutta, usually delivering food and doing other stuff to kind of address poverty issues, now 100% working on oxygen concentrators and COVID relief, including food, including feeding people, because that's become, right, a big issue.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I want to say is this, is that if what's happening now in South Asia and the diaspora is a sign to the rest of us, it's that borders are meaningless in a sense, right? Both in a practical sense, it's a virus, right? But in a real heart sense too. People's hearts are breaking all over the world because they have family members who are suffering. And it shows me how deeply we're all connected, and to ignore those connections, we ignore them at our peril, right? If we're like, oh, those people over there are suffering, that doesn't affect me. Well, that's not real. That's not real. That's an illusion. That's a false story that you're telling yourself. The real story is that we're all connected. And in a practical sense, right, helping other people in a virus pandemic helps us, but in a real heart spiritual sense, we're all connected. And I think that the heartbreak that the South Asian community, the Desi community is going through right now, really shows us how deeply interconnected we are. And anybody listening who's struggling or whose family members are struggling, we send you love and we're here with you. And I know this isn't an easy time. It's not an easy time for me, I'll be really honest. But I hope the best, and just know that we're in community with you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Amazing.
So I wanted to say thank you so much for your stories of strength and beauty, and for bringing us this world of just so much richness and joy and energy. And I commend both of you for allowing us to be in these worlds for multiple books, and really look forward to staying in these worlds and with you in all your writing projects. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This was great. What a highlight of the week, and getting to listen to Sayantani, even though we are now clearly mortal enemies from Kirby, M&M's versus.
That's a crossover book idea if I ever heard one. Thank you both so much. We want to thank everyone who's joined us. And again, I just want to reiterate our gratitude to our co-sponsors for the event. So this was brought to you by the Office of Religious Life, Hindu Life Program, the Kotzin Children's Library at Princeton University, the Princeton Public Library, our friends at Labyrinth Books and Shazams. Please do, especially if you're in the Princeton area, but even if you're not, do support them, jump online and purchase these books, purchase multiple copies of these books. These are treasures, and we're so fortunate to have them. So please do, avail yourself of these treasures. Once again, on behalf of all of our sponsors and co-sponsors, on behalf of Princeton University, thank you to Roshani, to Sayantani, to everyone who has joined us this evening, and really and truly to readers and to storytellers everywhere.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been such a joy. Thank you.